Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to First Fridays. These are our series of webinars and discussions about the business of being a spiritual writer. Today, our guest is our very good friend, Jennifer Grant. Jen is an author, speaker, and editor in the Chicago area, graduate of Southern Methodist University and Wheaton College. She's the author of 5 works of nonfiction and 3 books for children, unless she's come out with some more recently than my last count.
I think
her most recent releases are the memoir, When Did Everyone Else Get So Old? And Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too, which is a really wonderful children's book. Her picture book on grief, A Little Blue Bottle, which we'll talk about more in a moment, is going to be releasing next month. And more about Jen's background. For more than a dozen years, she wrote articles and all kinds of things for the Chicago Sun-Times magazine and other, and Chicago Tribune also, and many other online and offline publications. She and I have collaborated on just about every possible thing that I've been involved in. She's spoken at several of my conferences, been involved in my webinars, done several interviews. She's a member of the Writing for Your Life Writer Services team, and right now, we are collaborating on a new video interview series called Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. And so Jen's doing some of those interviews, and I'm doing some of those interviews, and it's always just an incredibly wonderful experience to do anything together with Jen. So thanks so much for being with us, Jen.
You bet. It's really fun. And the interviews, the election ones, I know, right now is we've been kind of inundated with election news with the convention going on this week and so on. But I have learned so much from this, even having just done, half a dozen of these. It's been so much fun to hear really what's at the core of people's political convictions and their story and how they were formed as political, people and how they engage civically and so on. It's been incredibly eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed these too, and every single interview goes in a different direction. You know what I mean? I found that, the conversations are very rich and deep, and, I get a lot out of them myself, so I'm really glad to be doing them.
Me too.
So let's start off by something that's very timely, which has to do with printing books. Jennifer just had a catastrophe, with the latest book that's coming out. I'll let you explain that and kind of share, the behind-the-scenes view of what can go wrong.
Well, so I've been gearing up, for the release of my latest picture book, which is called A Little Blue Bottle, and so that's been in the works for a long time, and it was supposed to launch next week. And I heard yesterday, late in the afternoon, from the publisher with this really lovely email saying, we're so sorry, but we're going to have to delay this for about a month because their printer had outsourced the printing to another company without their knowledge, and the other company who printed the book really messed it up, and the pages weren't quite right, and there's like white, frames on things that weren't supposed to have it and so on. And I really appreciated that the publishing company, has such a commitment to excellence that they weren't going to release it. It made me think of, I think I shared that with you, but I don't know if everyone's familiar with the movie Elf, which has a storyline with the
right.
Prince writer and Walter Hobbs, who's Elf's dad, starts off the movie being this kind of like egregious, greedy, not very committed to his family or committed to his work. And I think it's pretty early on where he signs off on a manuscript that is missing the last few pages. And so later in the movie they say, well, the kids want to know what happens. And he says, oh, they don't care. But so it's the opposite what my publishing house did, which is Church Publishing. They made it right. They had the printer make it right. So, it's a disappointment. It's of course, in the grand scheme of things, a month doesn't really matter. The only thing that's, just sort of, I have to recalibrate sort of some of my efforts in terms of spreading the word about the book. So I always back time from really any deadline, but a book release, you kind of like plan out social media stuff, and we have a launch team and all those things. So So yeah, that was that was yesterday's little surprise, but all will be well, I believe.
Never a dull moment, right? I mean, it's terrible to hear, that you have to go through that. And I'm just kind of curious. I mean, of all the other books that you've released, have you ever run into anything like this?
No, I really haven't. No, I was trying to think yesterday. I know that I've had friends who've had, some mistakes in their, either like a page that's blurry or, missing a little something, but it's pretty rare, I think. And I think that there's probably some connection with sort of the time we're in where, maybe, I don't know, maybe someone in the printing, whoever was at the printing place, maybe they're working remotely, or maybe there was sort of a step in it where somebody was supposed to look at the quality of what was going on, and I can't but think that it has something to do with the fact that business is so disrupted right now. So I don't know.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of supply chains disrupted, in several industries. So maybe, that's kind of what's going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad they caught it before it went out. And like you said, I'm glad you're getting the support from your publisher that you are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, these are discussions about business of being a spiritual writer, and anybody that has a question, feel free at any time to jump in and ask. I'm going to throw several different things at Jen. One of the things we typically talk about in this is like, typically an author doesn't make enough money just off of book royalties to make a living, right? And that's the bad news. The good news is that there's many different adjacent sources of income that generally people, participate in. And so I know that's the case for you. Maybe, Jen, you could talk a little bit, without sharing any numbers or anything, but just kind of let us know the different ways in which, you receive income that's associated in one way or another with your books and with writing.
Yeah. Well, I want to share, it's a really good question, and it's one that often people ask me, is just how can I support myself while trying to do this creative work? And several years ago, and I've probably referenced this to you before, but I hired an executive coach because I had so many different parts of my career kind of going. And I remember thinking that it was almost as though I had like a big table with all these file folders spilling out. I didn't really, but like in my mind I did. And I kept thinking, which things should I focus on? How can I organize these things? I'm speaking, I'm doing editorial, editing work, I'm writing, blog posts, being paid to do that. I'm doing all these different things, and what should I really focus on? So I hired this woman, and her name, she's a good friend now. Her name is Vicki Austin, and she actually has a wonderful book, which is called Circles of Gold. And it's about networking, and it's about creating and maintaining professional relationships. And I think it's actually like, well, I haven't read a lot of books about networking, but I highly recommend this to anyone. But what she had me do, and it really was groundbreaking for me, was in some of our sessions, she had like one of those big white paper, boards or whatever. And she wrote in the middle of it the first time, Jennifer Grant Inc. And I had never really thought of myself as a small business. But she said, okay, so that's you, that's your business. What are the different services that you offer? And again, I never thought about connecting all this, And I said, well, I do editorial consulting, and I write, and I speak, and, I do all this stuff. And so she wrote all that down. And then she went even further to your point about income. She said, what do you make, per year in these things? And I had never really put that all down in one place, thought about it. And so I could see that the places I was, when it was a year where I wrote a book and got a book contract, that advance would be higher. But usually like writing things, I would be writing like, I don't know, $500 for a little blog post or something like that. So what I was seeing is that the primary sources of really dependable year after year income were coming from things like consulting other people, helping people write book proposals. More recently, that's been like collaborative writing, where I'll either do developmental editing on somebody's manuscript or actually ghostwrite those things are much more lucrative than others. So I would say like when I think of that now, and now that's more sort of ingrained in my head, having worked with her, if it's what I normally make the most income in over the course of a year is editorial consulting. So someone will hire me, like I'm doing a project next week. Somebody's written a book, and they really, before submitting it for the final round to the editor, they really want it to be in the best shape that it can be in. So I've done this for this client before, of really digging deep, looking at the structure. So I'll probably suggest certain chapters be shuffled. I might even suggest that some of the chapters are completely rewritten, and that kind of work is deep, kind of exploring other people's manuscripts, but it's the most kind of dependable income stream that I have. And then speaking too, although that's been different this year, as we know, but that's another kind of dependable year after year. And in terms of like book contracts, well, some years I have them and some years I don't. And so that's not really a reliable stream of income.
Interesting. Wow. That's really great that,
I hope that answered that properly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's everyone needs a comprehensive view of that.
Right.
Whatever their respective elements are. And in everyone's cases, the percentages are different. The elements are different. There's no one model that fits everyone.
Right.
But, I'm glad that you're looking at it that way. I mean, that's, I think makes a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things. One is that maybe you could do an email introduction to Vicki for me. I think she might make a really great interview.
Oh, she's
part of this series.
Yeah, she would be terrific. And she's a very gifted public speaker as well. But I'm writing that down so I don't forget.
Yeah, please do. The other thing I'm curious about, I know, some of the like editing work that you get comes through Write If You Like, but some of it, where does most of it come from? Is it from publishing houses that know you, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a variety there's a variety of places where those clients come. Some of them are repeat clients, like this person, I'm going to be editing her book next week. I met her because she asked a friend whether she knew anyone who did developmental editing years ago, and the friend recommended me. And that one was actually kind of fun because she was relaunching a book, and the publisher had asked her to revisit the manuscript and see if there was any changes or updates or things that she wanted to do differently. And she had never felt really good about the first chapter of this book, which had been published. And I think it did fairly well. And so what was kind of fun is that usually I'm working, on a digital copy of something, but she actually gave me the hard copy of the book. And so I was able to read it. And when you're reading a book, and increasingly as I get older, I think I write in books more and more and more. I used to be, treat them as very like sacred items and never turn down the page or write in them. But now more and more I make notes in books. But it was fun to be the editor of this book and be able to just cross out whole, paragraphs or say this doesn't fit here and so on. And so some clients are repeat clients like that person. And she was referred by a friend in a writing group that I'm in. And then, I've had some publishers direct their writers to me to do like kind of a book doctoring kind of thing. I also get repeat clients through their agent. So I know a few people who are agents, and then either the writer working with that agent will say, I'm really stuck, or I just can't, my editors asked me to rework this and I don't understand how. So I've done a number of projects that were referrals from an agent who had a number of different clients working on different things. And some of the collaborative or ghostwriting has been that as well. Like an agent will have someone who's got a great story but isn't a writer, and they need someone to tell that story. So yeah, I would say there's just a few agents that have been reaching out to me over the last few years. So
well, isn't it wonderful to have a mature network of people who trust you?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that there's any more important asset in business than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You know what I mean? You built up a reputation, and people know your reputation now, and they, oh yeah, let's go have Jen do this. You know, I mean,
Right.
it's
And
just worth its weight in gold.
because it's true, like years ago, I remember really that frustrating feeling of trying to drum up business or trying to, get established and kind of, reaching out to people or saying, hey, I'm available for this, or how do I even begin finding, clients and so on. And it is kind of a function of having been doing it for a while, sort of like just, but it can be really frustrating when you're trying. I mean, I remember, when my kids were really little, being online, like trying to figure out how to get editorial jobs and, and to work from home. I mean, now everyone works from home, but yeah, it takes time to build that up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned agents, and that was one of the other topics I wanted to talk with you about. You've had different agents over a period of times, and you've written different types of books.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could talk about what that kind of has looked like, and how, what kind of role agents have played for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They've played all different kinds of, I've had very different kinds of agents. I've had a children's agent. I've had agents who work only in adult nonfiction. And I think I've had kind of an interesting kind of range of people. I've had, I used to work with Chris Farabee, and we stopped working together because I was really focusing on children's work and felt like I needed to shift gears a little bit. And he was a wonderful agent in that I felt like he was almost like he obviously dealt with anything that came up between me and my publishers, but and he kind of came to the rescue one time. I wrote a book, and after it was done, the the editor said, oh, we love it, but can you make it about half as long? And I'd had in the contract, a word count, and I had fulfilled that. And it was really like kind of like the rug felt pulled out from under me. And so Chris actually dealt with that very speedily, and I didn't have to do that. But one thing I appreciated about him was he's the person, and you've had conversations with him, but he's a very good listener. And some of the ways that he was an excellent agent for me was just sort of talking about career and big picture stuff. And I remember really appreciating, and we haven't worked together for several years now, but I remember really appreciating how he was a good listener. So like a phone call with him, and it wasn't like a Zoom call like this, but there would be long silences where I could tell he was really thinking, just really like processing, what could be a different direction for me to go in, or what could be, a good fit for me in terms of editors to work with and so on. And so he did both the sort of administrative part of like brokering, deals with publishers and dealing with little hiccups in the process. But he also felt like, we didn't talk very often, but the times we did, I felt like I had a better sense of where I fit in the big picture of the publishers and editors he worked with. So he was sort of that kind of, he played that kind of role. And then my current agent is more like he's very loyal and kind of, he's all about sort of like getting the best deal, kind of promoting in a call. He gets on calls with me and editors. So, I recently signed, or in March, I guess, I signed with Broadleaf Books to write this evening devotional that I'm working on now. And when we were sort of finalizing that deal, he came on a Zoom call with me and the editor. And, he really reflected about the content of what this book would be. And he had ideas about that. And it was kind of funny as we were discussing things and kind of having this really robust and fun conversation around both this project and other ideas I had. He kept slipping in, things like, well, maybe this should be a 2-book deal, and maybe this should be, and so he's very business minded, and he kind of promotes that way. And I've had I think people have had all kinds of relationships and ways of relating with their agent. And I think this is something in my Writers Guild we've been talking about over the course of this summer, which is what role do we want our agents to play? I think many of us would love to have an agent where we can kind of brainstorm and talk about ideas we have and have that person really champion them and really encourage us in our writing. But most of us have more of a, I think most people that I know have more of kind of a thing where we know our agent will be there for us if there's a problem, and they'll, obviously submit our work to editors and so on. And I'm still trying to work it out because I am in that funny thing of having books for kids and then books for adults. And yeah, it can be complicated because if I went only with a children's agent, it has gotten kind of messy sometimes, kind of complicated to try to work out. I did try to have two agents at one point, one to do children's stuff and one to do adult things. But then sometimes the people at a children's editor would say, hey, in our, trade meeting last week, somebody wants someone to write this for adults. And so then it would get kind of blurry. But
yeah, no, I can see where that would be complicated.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. And, if I was advising someone just getting started, I would tell them to focus on one or the other, not both. I mean, you're so far established, and talented that, that's not an issue. But, for someone getting started, it's like, I would definitely suggest that they focus on one or the other.
I've even heard, though, I have friends who are editors at smaller, independent houses. And I've even heard a lot of talk recently of them even saying, not everyone needs an agent. Now, I always have had one, and I've been really grateful to have one. And I've been glad for a number of reasons, in part because even just the thing of the job of submitting manuscripts and keeping track of that and so on, I'm really grateful not to be responsible for that. I love having someone else keeping track of all those, rejections and whatever. But some editors that I've heard recently at smaller houses are saying, because the margins are so low in publishing that, I actually heard this, a few months ago from a friend who's an editor, and he said, not everyone needs an agent because, I'll get a manuscript, I'll think it's terrific, I'll want to publish it, and I'll get back to the writer or to the agent, and I'll say, okay, this is what we can do, this is how much I can offer you for this book. And then the agent, sort of rattles the cages and says, no, we need this much. And then my friend, the editor, just said, and so then I say, no, really, that's all we can do. And it's not like the agent has brokered this huge 6-figure deal. You get what you get. And so, so he said, not everyone really needs an agent doing that for them. And then you don't lose that 15%. Now I always want to have an agent for a lot of reasons, but that's just another perspective that I've been hearing. And some, like our friend Glennis Nellist, who's an extremely successful writer for children, and she's published, I don't know, how many, 20 books for children? And she's done so well, and she doesn't have an agent. And, now her reputation sort of stands for itself, and she, and it's something that I think she thinks about, should I be getting an agent, should I not? But she and I are close enough that we do share with each other. Like, we've published with the same publishing houses, and we share those numbers with each other. So she can be assured, at least from that circumstance, that it was both, I think, got the same advance for, a book for kids. And so we share those numbers. And that's another thing that I think is helpful if you're in a writer's guild or you have close writing friends. It's great to share those numbers so that, in my writer's guild, there's been a number of times where someone says, hey, I got an offer from X publishing house and they're offering this. And, half a dozen people say, okay, they always lowball. So have your agent ask for, $5,000 more or whatever. And that has happened. So I think it is great when you have a trusted company of friends or colleagues where you can say, hey, can we talk, actual numbers together? And that's a way to kind of support each other and promote each other.
That's excellent advice. Yeah. From my perspective, agents are really valuable. The ones that are really good are really good, right? I mean, and helpful in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for someone who's, a newer author, they're particularly necessary to try to break through and get attention, from
Mm-hmm.
publishing houses. Because if you don't have any track record, if you don't have much of a platform, if you don't really have relationships with publishing houses already, then, going into that slush pile of,
Yeah.
unsolicited book proposals is really tough to break out of,
Mm-hmm.
unless you know someone, introduce them to whatever.
Right.
And having an agent, obviously play that role, makes an enormous amount of difference. That situation is much different than, for instance, you or Glennis, where you've already published lots of books, you've had lots of success. People know you, as we talked about earlier, your reputation precedes you, So there, I think it's still, agents add value. I mean, no question about that. But it's not the necessity level,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe it is for an earlier stage author.
Right. Right. One thing I've been saying to people, and that people reach out to me and say, like, I have this great picture book or board book or whatever, and I don't have an agent, I can't find an agent, and I don't have a platform and all that stuff. I have been seeing, and I've probably, maybe I've said this on one of our Writing for Your Life calls, but I have seen some people find success with when agents are do those pitch mad things on Twitter and say, today between 8 and 12,
Right.
invite unagented, writers to send me stuff. And I've been hearing some good stories about that, which can be an encouragement if someone's listening and thinking, oh, I don't have an agent, I can't find an agent, I can't get through to the editors. If you start sort of following your, if there's some publishing houses that you think would be a good fit for your manuscript, follow those editors on Twitter and watch for those events.
Mm.
Another thing that's been, and I don't remember if you've done this with Writing for Your Life, but I'm a part of the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and at their conferences, and I've seen this happen a number of times at these conferences, editors sometimes serve on a panel or they do a keynote or whatever, and then they'll say, hey, listen, if you're here, you can send me, put this as your subject line in your email, and for the next 3 months, I will read anyone's work from the, if you were attending this. And so, again, conferences are so important in terms of those kind of little possible, getting your foot in the door with an editor or a publishing house. So those are some alternative ways for someone who might feel like stuck or doesn't, or that they don't have like some way of breaking through.
Right. And just to answer that question, on all the Writing for Your Life conferences, I collect, book proposals,
Mm-hmm.
and, forward them to any of the speakers, the publishing industry speaker, whether it's an acquisition editor or literary agent. So yeah, that's part of when you attend a conference, that's one of the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm much less familiar with agents for children's books than I am for adult nonfiction. Can you talk a little bit about, are there just as many spiritual children's books agents, or is that fewer, or how does that work?
Yeah, I don't think I could really tell you a number. There are a lot of agents who exclusively represent children's book writers. I don't know how many that would be, like, who are exclusively sort of in the spiritual category. I think it's great to have, if anyone listening is a children's book writer, I think it is great to have, and I don't have this at the moment, but to have an agent who works in that field, because it is true that agents, good ones who have really strong networks and who have really strong kind of contacts in different fields, things will happen, like an editor will say to an agent, hey, do you have anyone who's written about, an ABC book about science, or, or whatever. And then the agent's sort of plugged in and can go to their writers and do that. So I'd need to do more research about how many, because a lot of my friends who write for kids either have an agent who I don't think is in the spiritual writing category per se, but does, any general market stuff. And then there's a number of my friends like Tracy Smith, who writes for children as well. She doesn't have an agent, and she has published with a few different publishing houses, but just continues to work with the same editors, and not go through her agent. So I think you've given me some homework to do.
Well, I need to do it myself. Like I said, I'm really kind of feeling uneducated about that. I mean, I've got relationships with quite a few agents that are either both or just adult, but not, I'm just really unfamiliar with the children's book part of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm making another note.
So here's a question from Maureen. I'd love to hear you and Jen talk about how important it truly is to have a platform before approaching an agent or an editor. I've heard that publishing houses just can't afford to take on writers that can't prove they have an audience to sell books to. Is this true? What do you think, Jen?
Well, I think it really depends on a number of things. I think that regarding like the big publishers, the big three or the big five, however you define it, yes, I think that's true. I think that they invest so much money in these books, and they give enormous advances, and they need to know that the person can sell the books, and has a platform. And I did some editorial consulting for a book, and it was for a big publishing house. And in the part of the proposal saying what the platform was, the writers of this book had, 750,000 followers in different.
Oh my.
So, but that again, that's where the people are getting, probably a six-figure, contract with this.
Sure.
But that's one thing, and so yes, a big place would want you to have a huge following. But there are a lot of smaller independent houses where you're going to get a lot less. You might get, $5, $10, $20, $30,000 as your advance. But if they're taking a lower risk because they're not paying as much, and maybe that's a lot in their budget, but then they don't expect that you're going to sell a million copies of it either. So I think it really depends on why you're doing this and your sense of kind of mission about it. And it is important to have a platform, but often when I'm talking with an editorial client, like it's a new client, they often ask about this, how should I build my platform first? Should I write the book first? And I really think you can do these things concurrently. So, for instance, if you were writing about, let's say, grief, that's the topic of my picture book. And if I were a new author and I was wanting to write a picture book about grief and wanting to sell it, I could be working on the book and editing it and crafting it and refining the story. But concurrently, I could be following blogs where people are writing about grief. I could be on Twitter, reading what's being said on that and making connections and really doing an organic kind of getting to know people online, getting to know people in person if that's possible, and growing your platform that way. Maybe doing guest blog posts on grief blogs, doing other things to make authentic connections with other people who are interested in the topic. And so you could be doing, writing and editing, reaching out to agents, and connecting with real people and connecting and if you were to write a blog post every month for a grief blog, then people would start following you and people would be reacting to your ideas and interacting with you. And that could be something in a book proposal. You could say, like, I don't have a huge platform, but these are the ways that I'm connecting with people around my topic. And so I think you can do all these things kind of at the same time. I don't mean 10 hours a day, for these things, but just to be intentional about the communities where you're showing up online and make sure they're relevant to the thing that you're interested in and trying to add value to. So I don't know if there's another element to that question that I could answer better.
Well, I think that's all good advice, and the same thing I've seen, for the large publishing houses, it's mandatory to have a sizable platform before you get a book deal. For the mid-size or smaller publishing houses, your platform doesn't have to be as big. But at the same time, you're competing for book slots. Each one of these publishing houses only has so many book slots per year. And several of those are taken up by people that they've already published, their books, particularly, if they've been successful and proven they can sell books, things like that. So the number of slots for new authors is even less. And it's pretty competitive. Right. And so they're all else being equal, they would favor an author that's got more of a platform. That doesn't mean that they won't bring in an author that doesn't have a platform or has a smaller platform, whatever. But that means that author has to be that much better in other dimensions, to offset the fact that they have less of a following.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So, thanks to both of you, Brian. That is such a great way for you to word that. And I'm asking this not just on my own behalf as a writer, but also because I work with a lot of writers, and most of them are very introverted, and they hate the idea of putting themselves out there. And, there's this world of thinking from, when things were different in the publishing world, before print on demand and all this other stuff we have now that makes it so competitive because anybody can publish a book the editors and publishers will just do all that for me. And I love, Brian, you're saying, yes, you could have it happen, but your book would have to be like amazing, like so outstanding. And Jen, I thank you for that language. These are the ways I'm connecting with people around this topic. I wrote that down because that's such a helpful way to look at it. One of the things I appreciated the most about that wonderful Writing for Your Life conference was the way that people talked about how you connect with people. And that's so much easier to think about than building a platform, which does not sound appealing to a lot of people, just the language of it.
Right. The abject terror that most of us have when we first have on a stage. I've heard I've seen some just ads, and I get on Facebook, I get, of course, all the ads for like writing conferences and everything else. But I've been seeing someone, offering like a paid seminar on building a bridge. And so instead of creating a platform that you're standing on, exposed in front of this huge thing, you're building a bridge to the people that need what you're writing. I like that.
Yeah. The language is so important, isn't it? Finding the right metaphor. I remember I was telling a group of my students years ago that I hated submitting work. And one of my people said, well, who wants to submit? That's like being under somebody's heel. Nobody wants that. And so I came up with this idea of I'm launching my pieces, and launching was much more, just the thought of doing it made it easier. So that I love that, building a bridge. And while I'm here, I just have to thank you for this book. I'm holding up Jen's Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too. I have a 7-year-old, 4-year-old, and 2-year-old grandchildren, and I have read this book to them a number of times already, and they love shouting out, maybe I can love my neighbor too. And I actually feel like they're kinder after they hear it, it's just remarkable. So thank you for that. So.
Hey, I don't know if you discovered it, but on the Beaming Books website, we created some like downloadable little like worksheets and stuff and games related to that. So if you go,
awesome.
Yeah, so you can.
No, I hadn't yet. So that'll really be wonderful. And then I have one more question, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd love to hear you talk about the ways that you found to build your bridges from the work that you've done. And I think both in the realm of children's books and adult books, because this is something that I think everybody, as Brian pointed out, it's so necessary to do. And I think all the good ideas we can hear about it are useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know that I'm good at seeing for other people how best to market their. I don't think I've done an exceedingly great job at building a platform or whatever. But one thing that I've tried to do is just really focus on, I always think of my life sort of as the inside out. Like, it's really important to me to have authentic and strong relationships. Like, I would hate to be a successful writer or parenting writer and then come home to a really unhappy family. You know what I mean? And so I always sort of start, if you picture like a target or a bullseye sort of thing, I always think about how I can start right where I am and kind of move out. And so in terms of like connecting with readers, I've done a lot, and of course that ended, in March, but a lot of speaking at local like book clubs. I had a number of speaking events this past February where I was talking, because my most recent memoir was about midlife. I was speaking with a lot of groups of women who were, 45 plus and kind of going through the sort of typical milestones of midlife. And so yeah, I guess one way is to kind of develop relationships and then sort of start where you are, and one thing I had an assistant do a few years ago was to, I attend an Episcopal church in the Chicago area, was to look at, to identify all the Episcopal churches that were sort of within a certain radius of where I lived. And then I reached out to, I looked online and saw who, like, let's say the women's ministry person was, and let them know about my work. And that was a way that then I was invited to speak at women's retreats or just at their, Wednesday morning, whatever, or Thursday night thing. And then I was again, like, sort of starting where I am and starting with the people whose felt needs may be the same as what was in my mind when I was writing that book. So that's one way. And I'm trying to think of ways I've done it. I'm a little scattershot, of course, because I do write for kids and write for adults. One thing that I was doing for a while was, when that midlife memoir came out a couple of years ago, I did a few, and this I did, and I think most of the contacts were kind of grew out of my own writing guild, but a number of times I did a thing where I would go and travel or do it locally, and on the Saturday I would do like a women's retreat and talk about the content of that memoir, and then on the Sunday morning I would read, my kids' books to the Sunday school and have kind of, because the first book in the Maybe series is has a grandma and her grandson, and so there's a real intergenerational element to it. So I would do these kind of intergenerational Sunday morning things where I would talk in a Sunday school group and read the book and have like coloring pages and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think again, it's sort of like, yeah, for me, I guess I don't think of it so much as like a bridge or a platform, but almost like growing from the inside out. I don't know if that makes sense. Like planting, letting them kind of develop. I have some really treasured relationships with the people that I am in a writing guild with, and we do network for each other, or if, I don't know, if they're approached to speak somewhere and can't do it, we'll post it in our group and someone will say, hey, does anyone have any interest in pitching for this thing or whatever. So it's there's a lot of like mutual respect and the belief that we can really help each other find our readers by being really generous with each other. That's the other thing I really see, and particularly in the children's world. Many of the children's authors that I've come to know, not only ones who are in the kind of spiritual writing space, but just generally too, I have found most are incredibly generous, just really generous with their time and with their kind of sharing of best practices and so on. I think there's a real humility in the children's, at least for most, I mean, almost every children's author that I've met, whether or not they're in the kind of Christian space, has been incredibly generous and kind of like, oh, here's a place you could, you could contact this library who does these events, or you could, there's kind of a lovely kind of mutuality in that. And in the best kind of spiritual writers that I know as well, like just a real belief that supporting each other only elevates us all. There's not kind of a grabbiness to it, I think. I don't know. Brian, do you find that, like, in the spiritual writers that you work with, it doesn't feel, I don't know, people don't feel to me like grabby or self-protective, or this is my space and, these are my readers. And, it feels the opposite, where I feel like we're all kind of, if we believe in what the person is doing, we really want to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have enough experience yet in children's books to say that I perceive a difference between children's books and adult books. But overall, my feeling is that so many of the people that I work with, the authors that I work with, the publishing industry people, the agents, are all just so generous. It's so great to work with. Now, I come from a high-tech industry that's a little bit more cutthroat and ruthless and competitive, where, that kind of thing and cooperation, isn't nearly that level. And it's secular. It's not, a group of Christians either. But the other part of it, I think, is that, I try to be somewhat selective too, and the people that I, deal with on various levels are people who I want to deal with, who I feel like, have a real heart for other writers and, just a generosity of spirit. And so I find that to be, a wonderful aspect of this whole space.
Yeah. One other thing, I'm so excited to go and get the downloads, and I happen to know somebody very well who does all the tech support for a small, very service-oriented Episcopal school, and then that just made me think about all the different groups. My grandson is in a little pod of students, and I just wonder if you have thought about doing some sort of presentation around this book that could be a lesson. That you have such a wonderful way about you. I just love your calm kindness, and I just don't know if you've thought about, or if you're already offering maybe an opportunity to either meet with groups or to create something that could be used and that you could link in.
That's a great idea. No, I've wondered about that, because I do know there's so many, there's just so many groups of kids who are either isolated at home or with a small group. And I do, that book means a lot to me because, I've heard some really wonderful, I actually just recently gave it to one of my nieces who's got a little 2-year-old son, and they live in Chicago. And she said that every night before he goes to bed, he asks her to go in the backyard and hold him up over the fence, and he says, "Good night, neighbors," and just with the neighborhood.
That's great.
Yeah, and I love that. And really at the heart of, for me, my faith, right, is love your neighbors, and so love God and love your neighbor. And so it felt like such a privilege to write that for kids and kind of introduce that idea in a way that was kind of relatable maybe for them. So yeah, I'll think about it. I think that's a terrific idea.
Please do. And because I would love to share about that. And it's occurred to me, and on another note, there's all of these kids and parents who desperately need content, content, and also some sort of community. And I was thinking, I wish I could find all the adult people, especially older people who are locked alone in their homes with no human contact, and kids who need to have loving and kind people spending time with, just that connection. So I don't even know how to begin with all of that, but I just have a huge passion for connecting people in this, around this idea of how we use the best of ourselves and share that with other people, and how we can contribute to one another. And this book is, I mean, I got teary even having you say that, because I've just had such a wonderful experience with it myself. And I feel like, especially right now when people are so isolated, and everyone is getting used to what it is to actually have meaningful, deep connections via Zoom. And Brian, that conference, I cannot say enough about what a wonderful experience it was, and how genuine and it was just amazing. And the friends I told about it who came, and my students who came, thanked me up and down for the opportunity that it was to be a part of it. So yeah, so think about it and let us know.
Well, that is a wonderful book. I mean, my kids and my grandkids love that book too. And, you know, I'm so glad Jen wrote it and that it's out there for everyone. It just, I mean, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Thank you.
But, you know, the idea, I mean, you mentioned that Beaming has got some materials associated with the book. I mean, do they have multimedia? Do they have you doing a video reading it or anything like that?
You do. Well, when it first came out, I did a video, you know, like a Facebook Live thing, reading it. I don't know whether that's on their site, but yeah, I mean, I think increasingly, I mean, like for the new book, for the A Little Blue Bottle, I helped create a bunch of activity sheets as well for that. And that one is all about grief. And so the sheets are about like, you know, feelings, identifying different feelings, and just kind of simple worksheets. And we did a little maze thing too. But I think you're right. I mean, I think increasingly that, what you said about people becoming accustomed to really relating in a deep way over Zoom, and kids too, right? Because they're doing their school. So that coupled with the need for things to occupy them and to have something fresh to do, or some, you know, I think that's a really good idea. It makes me think, I do have these close friends who also write for kids, including Glennis Nellist, and then my friend Tracy Smith, who who works really a lot like with children's ministers and creating content and talking about the different challenges and aspirations that they have. But I think I'll talk to them both about how we can collaborate to do something like that. Because Tracy Smith is a pastor very close to where I live, and she did a children's ministry kind of one-day workshop, and people came from all over the country. It was really surprising. I was part of that with her. But yeah, I think people are hungry for quality content, and, you know, yeah, especially right now when everyone's.
Yeah, it's so timely. And it just struck me, and I don't, you know, I mean, I know we're on a call that lots of people will listen to, but so I'm, you know, I think can I contact you via your website? Is there a
yeah.
Okay. So, cause I have some ideas that aren't really, you know, that are personal, but I'm definitely, I was like, why haven't I shared on Facebook yet about this wonderful book? And, you know, so I will see if I can't, well, I will absolutely do that and at least get the word out to the people that I know. And that will be one start for it. But I'm glad you're going to talk about it, because I would just love it if every kid had a chance to experience these ideas, and, you know, what that could do for us, especially right now in our country with so much division. I think this is a time when this message is even more important. So
yeah.
Thanks, Jen.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all of that.
So you just gave me a great idea for the Compassionate Christianity website. We have a whole page full of recommended children's books. And, you know, it would take some time, but, you know, getting recordings of each one of those authors, reading their books, you know, putting them on that one page, that would be pretty powerful.
It'd be really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to work on that.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And maybe linking too to those different activity sheets, if there are them, for various people's books. You know?
I didn't even know that they had that for your book. And I don't know how many books they do that for, all the different publishers, but that's...
I think it's more, of course, because people are looking for things to do with their kids. So
yeah, and I just realized that I need to jump on Amazon, and what I'll do is I'll get the worksheets, and then on my Amazon review I'll mention, oh, and did you know you could get these
Great.
You can get these worksheets, and that'll help to maybe get at least a few more people who will know about it even right now. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, this has been great. Jennifer, thank you so much. Maureen and everyone else, thank you for everyone that's joined us. As is always the case, it's such a pleasure to spend time with you, Jen, and really appreciate you doing that with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was really nice to talk with both of you.
Yeah.
So
thanks for hosting this, Brian.
Oh, well, my pleasure as always. No question about that. And just to let everyone know, we've got a few online conferences coming up. In September, we will have a children's book conference. Our very first Writing for Your Life children's book conference will be online starting September 21st. In October, we will have a Publishing in Color online conference. And in November, we will have a Writing for Your Life online conference. So Maureen, somewhat similar to the one that you participated in June. This one won't be quite as long. It'll only be 1 week instead of 2 weeks, but similar type of conference, similar kind of format. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning, and look forward to seeing you again at one of our second Tuesday writer discussion groups or at one of our conferences. So thanks everyone.